For me, it was torturous. I did not at all ever have that urge. Here's an idea. Let's just make this bloody sequel and get it. We should be doing this. The runway for the tiny little island hopping plane that would bring you into Puerto Princesa was like dirt. Wow, that's a big question. Be as big as you are. Be everything you were destined to be. I don't want to contend with Sauron. I would much rather contend with the smoke monster or Thanos. That's maybe not the answer you were looking for, but that's the secret truth of Evangeline Lilly. I'm so flattered and so honored that you feel that way. Thank you so, so much.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Once and Always a Fanboy podcast with me, your host, Chris Cantada Force. This is my very first episode ever, and what an honor to have this person as my very first guest. You may know her as Hope from the Ant-man and Avengers movies, or Tauriel if you're a fan of Middle-earth, but to me, she will always be one of the survivors of Oceanic Flight 815, Kate Austen. Do stay until the end because I'll share how this podcast came to be and what motivated me to invite this first guest. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Evangeline Lilly. Hi Evangeline, my name is Chris. I'm a YouTuber from the Philippines. Lost has a very special place in my heart, so it's unbelievable and amazing to speak to you today. So thank you so much for your time.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Chris.
As a fan of the show, I learned early on in the first season that you guys would have viewing parties at the house of whoever character was featured on in that week. How was it like during those parties?
Torture. For me, it was torturous. I hated having my bad acting on display for all of my incredibly talented colleagues to see, with me sitting right there. I felt like I wanted to crawl into a hole and die every single one of those, especially if it was my episode, because then I was on so much and the focus was so much on me, and I just never felt like I carried the show well enough. Especially, we were having those viewing parties in the first season. And the first season of Lost, I was completely new to acting and I was so green. I really didn't know what I was doing. And so, yeah, they were just torture for me.
Well, just to let you know that for us, the fans, you were amazing.
Thank you.
With all the twists and surprises in this show, what was your favorite? What stuck with you, especially when you were reading it on the script?
I think it sounds a little bit trite and, only because it's just such an obvious one, but it's obvious because everyone loves it so much. It was that Locke was wheelchair bound. And I still don't think any of the plot twists or toying with time and time travel and the constant and all of that, I think that still might be my favorite twist in the show.
Do you think Lost would have had a different reception in the age of streaming? Like all episodes of a season in one go? Or was the week-to-week viewing part of the experience that made Lost great?
I definitely think that the week-to-week viewing was a huge part of that experience. Lost really hung its hat on asking all of its viewers the hard questions of life. Why are we here? What is this place called Earth? Are we on a holodeck? Are we in purgatory? What is our existence about? Does it have meaning beyond the mechanics of science? And those questions are questions that, if not given time to ruminate within each viewer, wouldn't have the same impact on their soul, on their psyche, on their relationships. But because they were left with those questions for a week every episode, and then they would go the next day with these burning questions to work or to the breakfast table with their family, or to visit their ailing mother, or whoever it was that they were with. When you listen to the fans talk about the show and what it meant to them, it is so much more than entertainment value to Losties. It was a soul experience. It was a deep, moving, interpersonal growth experience for so many people. And I really believe that that's only because they were invited into themselves through the questions that we asked, and then given the time to do that exploration on their own. And I think if you could have binged it, you'd have just hopped from episode to episode to find out what happens next, and you would have missed all of those moments to do that inner exploration.
As a music lover, I'm curious. If Kate Austen owned an iPod back in 2004 when Oceanic Flight 815 crashed on the island. What do you think her top 3 songs would be on her rotation?
Immediately, what came to mind was Alanis Morissette. I feel like Kate Austen would have definitely been an Alanis Morissette fan. And if I had to pick a song, the song that I would be good, dude, it's incredible. And of course, Kate Austen, that was the struggle of her life, was whether or not she was good. The next one, I just went straight to Radiohead. I went to Let Down, maybe that one. And then another song came to mind, which was Aqualung. But they have a song, it's called If I Fall. And that could be quite anthemic to Kate's life also. Well, those are also 3 of course, my favorite songs as well. And one of the things that was always a bit surreal playing Kate Austen was how similar her and I were and how many overlaps there were in our natures. And so it wasn't too much of a stretch for me to look for some songs that might have been on her playlist.
Since you've been a writer almost your whole life, did you ever get the urge to write an epilogue, so to speak, of Kate's story post-Island? Like, what do you think she would be doing today in 2024?
I did not at all ever have that urge because I felt like the show really wrapped it all up. I know a lot of people don't feel that way, but I do. I feel like they really successfully wrapped up the mysteries and the arcs of each person and what they had to learn and where they needed to reach and the growth that they had to go through. But I can say that I did fully, in depth and detail, outline a sequel to Real Steel, which is a film I did with Hugh Jackman, which really deserved a sequel and never got the sequel it deserved. And at one point, I reached out to Sean Levy and was like, Sean, if they're just struggling for ideas, here's an idea. Let's just make this bloody sequel and get it. We should be doing this. And he was like, trust me, I would make a sequel if we could. I have pushed for it. And we had this great discussion. He read the outline and was like, this is a great story, but they're just not going to greenlight it. So that is one project that I did go ahead and write what happened after the story ends.
So I heard you visited the Philippines many years ago. Do you still remember your time there? Have you been back since?
I remember it vividly. It was my first time traveling internationally in my life. And I was 18 years old and I did a short-term missions trip to the island of Palawan. Now, when I was 18, the island of Palawan was nothing like what people think of it as today. It was not a resort island. There was nothing there. The runway for the tiny little island hopping plane that would bring you into Puerto Princesa was like dirt. It was just dirt and gravel. And there were jeepneys and there were a few, food and goods sellers there right on the side of the runway selling things. And then the rest of the island was just jungle. We actually had to trek for 2 days to get to the place that I was staying and the tribe that we were visiting. And I loved it so much. I fell so deeply in love with that experience and the place and the people and the simplicity of the tribal existence that I signed up to do a 2-year term there and was all set to go. I'd raised all the money and I was ready to go back and be the nurse and the teacher for the children of that tribe. And I was 18 years old, which meant I was a minor and my parents refused to let me go. So, but I've never been back. I meant to go back then, like I said, for 2 years, and after that, I never did make it back.
Well, if you do get a chance, you should go back to Palawan because it's really beautiful.
Because I heard it was like resorts and, super fancy now, which I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to go back there.
Yeah.
Or it's not really my thing.
You've played so many iconic characters in your career, and as a sci-fi fantasy fan, my favorites, of course, Kate, Tauriel, and Hope. What was an important lesson you took from any of these characters that you brought with you in your own life after you portrayed them? Could be an experience on set, a note from a director, or even the camaraderie of being in an ensemble cast.
Wow, that's a big question. I'd always been a bit confused about whether or not I was destined to be a leader, not like necessarily a world leader, but just a leader, somebody who leads people, because I'd always had this passion to defend the defenseless and a real extreme, intense passion for justice and a real fury and anger over injustice. On Lost, there were lots of situations I found myself in that I felt were unjust, which was the case and remains the case all over film sets, because we all work ridiculous hours and people really get worked to the bone. And sometimes the expectation that the show must go on and the work has to come before everything can become borderline abusive. And I found myself at times trying to stand up for and defend the crew, at other times trying to captain the cast in things like renegotiations or things like that. So I think that was something I took away from Lost, was a clearer sense of myself and my place in the world. And then I remember very distinctly there was one point in my career and I signed on with UTA, and Jim Burkus, who was the head of UTA, had a meeting with me and the team. And his advice to me that stuck and has never left me was, he told me, Evangeline, your humility is not helping anyone, which was essentially saying, like, you making yourself small doesn't help you. It doesn't help the people who want to work with you. It doesn't help the people who love watching you. Be as big as you are. Ask for as much as you deserve. Be everything you were destined to be, and stop trying to make yourself smaller than you really are. And that was a really meaningful moment that stuck with me.
If you, Evangeline Lilly, were transported to a different world and your only choices were the island, Middle Earth, or the MCU, which one will you pick to go to and why?
Without hesitation, Middle Earth.
Oh, yeah.
I do find the evil in Middle Earth scarier than any of the other evils. Like, I don't want to contend with Sauron. I would much rather contend with the smoke monster or Thanos, honestly. But I also don't find that the goodness anywhere else is nearly as delicious and tempting and innocent and beautiful and noble. And the beauty of the diversity in Middle Earth and all the different beings that exist there and all the different ways that they live and the things that characterize them. That was a fantasy come true for me when I got to step into the physical Middle Earth that Peter Jackson created for us on The Hobbit. I felt like every day was like a pinch me moment where I was living out one of my childhood fantasies of actually being in Middle Earth.
If I may, I'd like to talk about Real Steel for a moment. I watched it a few weeks ago again in a very long time. It really is a great feel-good movie. Your performance there for me really stood out, especially at that final round of the match where you were literally giving your all cheering for Hugh Jackman's character, Charlie. This is really just for me, but I was curious, do you remember what it was like filming those cheering scenes in the arena? Were the surrounding extras just quiet while you were just screaming your heart out with every line you had to say?
First of all, please do bring up Real Steel. I think out of all the movies that I've made and Lost and everything, the ones that I like to watch the most are Real Steel and Ant-Man, the first Ant-Man. Those are my two faves. They're feel-good movies, and I love those feel-good movies. That scene I will never, ever forget shooting. First of all, I was a month or 2 or 3 pregnant, and nobody there knew it. Second of all, I was actually in an arena that was that size, and I was there with 20 other people who were surrounding me on all sides and nobody else. The arena was otherwise empty, including the ring. The ring was empty. So I was watching nothing and pretending to see this heart-wrenching father-son scene moment, this impossible underdog fight being won by the underdog, and all those things was just Sean Levy on a God microphone saying, okay, now he's jumping in the air and he's coming across with a right hook and just talking me through the whole thing. While all the extras around me, like you said, just quietly, silently, were like pretending to physically cheer. And the only person allowed to make noise was myself in this echoing, gigantic, empty auditorium. It was very challenging. It was not easy. And I felt like an idiot most of the time. I felt so stupid doing that scene. And then when I actually finally got to see it on camera and see those moments between Hugh and Dakota, it really was able to totally break my heart as an audience member because I hadn't ever seen it before. And it's such a beautiful moment. That moment where Dakota just gets that tear that runs down his face and he's like cheering for his dad and he just pauses and sees the hero and his father he's always wished his father would be. Oh, chicken skin.
Since I'm known for being that geek fanboy on my channel, what are you currently fanning or fangirling over right now?
Well, I am currently fangirling over Miranda July. I don't know if you know who she is, but she did a film years and years ago, which was called, I think it was Me, You, and Everyone We Know. So it put her on the map as an up-and-coming filmmaker. After that, she only did, I think, 2 other feature-length films after that. But she's also done art installments. She writes books. She just recently wrote a novel called All Fours, and I absolutely love it. I got the novel given to me by a friend, and that sent me down the Miranda July rabbit hole. So I'm now like watching everything she's ever made and doing all the things. So I'm on a Miranda July rabbit hole at the moment. And for about the last 2, 3 years, I would say, I've been on a major Carl Jung rabbit hole, fangirling out over Carl Jung and all of his incredible wisdom. That's maybe not the answer you were looking for, but that's the secret truth of Evangeline Lilly. She fangirls out over real nerds.
That's okay. We're all nerds in our own niche. For my last question, for you personally, what do you think is the secret to lost success, that it's still just as awesome today as it was 20 years ago?
I think that when art ventures to grapple with the big questions of essentially religion and philosophy, it strikes a nerve that's so universal. When you really dare to grapple with them in a meaningful way, and you can make that entertaining, I think you'll probably have something fairly timeless on your hands. But I also really believe in timing being sort of a magical thing. And I think if Lost, like you said earlier, we talked about earlier, if it came out today in the age of streaming, maybe it wouldn't have hit in the same way. If it had come out even 5 years earlier, maybe the world wouldn't have been ready for it. But it just happened to be that the world was ready for that show with those characters and those messages at that moment. We were doing something very, very new with our format. Up to that point, mostly you saw soap operas and sitcoms on TV, and then you had the crime dramas. But nobody was doing feature-length films repeatedly week after week over and over and over again for 22 episodes a season. That was extraordinarily ambitious. We were the most expensive pilot ever made at that point. And that was because the production quality was so high. The fact that that budget even got approved is insane and says that the industry and the world were ready for this seismic shift in television entertainment, which we now can see has proliferated the entire industry. And so it was just nestled in the perfect moment in time for it to blossom and fly. And it's done that. And I'm very, very honored to have been a part of it.
Thank you so much, Evangeline. You are without a doubt one of my favorite actors. I've been interviewing for quite some time and I was just waiting for this moment to happen.
Aww.
And it finally did. So I really appreciate your time. Hopefully one day I get to interview you in person.
I would love that. That would be so great. I'm so flattered and so honored that you feel that way. Thank you so, so much. I'll see you next time, Chris.
Take care.
Bye.
Hope you enjoyed my interview with the phenomenal Evangeline Lilly. I'm sure a lot of you know that I've been on YouTube for a decade now. I started with fan films and skits and was doing pretty okay. But in 2016, I was invited to my very first junket, the Captain America Civil War junket, where I interviewed Chris Evans, Anthony Mackie, and Sebastian Stan. Like, I didn't think that could ever happen to someone like me, a YouTuber. I was hooked with that type of excitement and I wanted to do more. Unfortunately, I learned that it was not as easy. Even if my channel had 1 million subscribers, for the studios, especially in my country, TV will always be king. Studios will always pick a TV station rather than a YouTube channel to fill in their slots. And rightly so, since for sure they will get a larger audience. But that being said, I truly believed I had something to offer. So last month, I tried something. John Locke had this famous saying, "Don't tell me what I can't do." And because it was the 20th anniversary of Lost back in September, I was reminded of that saying. So I decided to use it as fuel. I started to reach out to the actors themselves through their management. And I started to notice something. Their people were actually responding to my emails. I started to believe in myself, that my channel is actually worthy enough to be taken seriously as a media outlet. Evangeline was the very first actor I contacted, and she had a profound impact on me as she was part of the things I truly enjoyed in my adult life. Lost, Middle-earth, and the MCU. And she said yes. I've actually done a couple of interviews already with me going through the actors themselves, but Evangeline was the very first one who said yes. We had to line up our schedules, but we finally had our interview. And it was above and beyond what I've ever dreamed it could possibly be. I don't know if you're watching this podcast on my channel, but you can definitely see I was entranced. Not just because she is one of my favorite actors, but she has a beautiful heart and soul, and hearing her passion through this interview was such an honor for me. Thank you, Evangeline, for being the spark that lit up this new drive within myself, that I could do it when others cast me aside. Thank you also to Sarah and Shani for helping make this a reality. So that's it for my very first podcast episode. Catch me again next week for another special guest. And remember, once a fanboy, always a fanboy. See ya!